Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Greetings, everybody, to this week's episode of, I was going to say Breaking History. No, it's Movie Nights. So we're going to watch a movie tonight, as we do every Monday night at this time. And tonight, as I announced last week, is going to be a little special something with Cynthia, who will be joining me after today's screening because she is the architect of Escaping Calypso's Island. Escaping Calypso's Island. So this is a new series. Well, new. It was begun about a year and a half ago. We've done 3 episodes. Cynthia has written and narrated them. Our filmmaking brilliant friend Jason Dahl has done the multimedia aspect, the sound, and everything else that you're going to enjoy tonight. Cynthia asked that we begin with episode 2 on the energy wars. So we're going to do episode 2. Each one is a bit of a standalone, so don't stress out. If you haven't seen episode 1, you'll still be able to enjoy this greatly on as a standalone. And I said the energy wars, but I'm lying to you. It's actually game theory, the trap of game theory. That is the core thrust of today's episode. The energy wars is the next episode 3. Which we will likely watch, I would imagine, next week. After the main broadcast is finished, I'll bring on Cynthia and we'll talk about her film. And if anybody's got some questions they want to throw at Cynthia, think about them, chew on them, and then throw them into the chat. And I will do my best, as I always do, to address them accordingly. I'll bring up the comments, and Cynthia and I can both discuss whatever questions are raised. Before we do anything, though, like usual, we're going to listen to a couple of words from today's sponsors, the first being Pet Club. Here we go.
Science proves that a healthy immune system is the body's first defense against the smallest of ailments to the most catastrophic. Coriolus versicolor is the most sought-after, all-natural supplement for both humans and pets to help boost the immune system. There are over 400 studies worldwide on its effectiveness in humans, including Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and now from the University of Pennsylvania School of Veterinary Medicine. Together, we can help reverse this terrible tide now plaguing your loved ones and give them the immune-boosting supplements that they need.
All right, so that was Pet Club, and now we're going to listen to a word from Mike Lindell at MyPillow.
It's finally here, our second annual mega sale. This sale only comes around once a year, so take advantage of the best offers ever while you can. For example, save 50% on our Giza Dream bed sheets, as low as $29.98. And for the first time ever on TV, MyPillow mattresses and MyPillow mattress toppers, as low as $99.98. And you save 50% on our Lux Pure 6-piece towel sets. Regular $69.98, now only $39.98. And our best-selling standard MyPillows, regular $49.98, on sale for $17.98. Wait on it, mega sale, only $14.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our second annual mega sale. But wait, there's more. To make the mega sale even more special, when you order right now, your order's going to ship absolutely free.
Thank you, Mike Lindell. All right, so I hope everybody's all cozy. I hope you got your drink, your popcorn, your loved one, and I hope you've got your thinking cap on as well, because you will be entertained, but it will also involve thinking. What a novel idea, thinking and entertainment in the same experience. Whew. And like I said, Energy Wars, sorry, not Energy Wars, The Curse of Game Theory is the name of this one. And yeah, just enjoy it. We're going to listen to a movie now. Uh-oh. For some reason, this is not working. I'll get it. Don't worry. Okay. We'll get this yet. I promise everybody. I'll figure out why I cannot see the movie in front of me. There it is. I got it. Okay.
Our world appears to be captured within a cave of limited imagination when thinking about the future. Despite the incredible abundance which we could create, the only acceptable discussions about the future of humanity showcase a belief that scarcity, war, and poverty are the only future which we should expect. In this episode of our series, we will evaluate the principled fallacies of this belief in scarcity, limited resources, and overpopulation. We will do so by exposing several pseudo-scientific beliefs that are currently holding humanity back from an age of freedom, creativity, and cooperation.
It's a dog park.
The old cone of shame, right?
It's called an Elizabeth.
It is common in our modern day and age to hear the phrase zero sum, that we live in a world that is governed by limited resources, and that for one group to gain a bigger piece of the so-called pie, there must in turn be another group that loses a piece of the pie. This scenario is often referred to as a game. That is, that we live in a zero-sum game where the players must weigh the costs and benefits in operating within such a framework. This theory of zero-sum first originated with the advent of game theory, the mathematical theory of games of strategy, developed by John von Neumann according to his book, Theory of Games and Economic Behavior, which he co-authored with Oscar Morgenstern. The crux of game theory is that an individual's behavior will always be motivated towards achieving an optimal outcome, which is determined by selfish self-interest. That for one player to maximize their payoff, it must come at the cost of the other players.
We have to prepare for a more angry world.
Today, much of the world is governed by this very theory. We are now at a point where it is considered by many to be essential, if not at the very core of what dictates and models our economic, political, sociological, as well as military behaviors and outcomes, and is taught as much set in stone. This approach to understanding systems began in the early 1970s as the Club of Rome popularized the notion that the entire world evolution could be measured in models. These models, which all assumed that we lived in a zero-sum world, would be used to extrapolate trends into the future, paying no consideration to human solve via technological innovation.
It's not some science fantasy effect from 2001. This electronic display, emanating from Australia's largest computer, is a picture of the condition, past, present, and future of planet Earth. The condition of the planet starts to become highly critical, and if we don't do anything about it, this is what's going to happen. The quality of life is going to go right back to practically zero.
But can we be certain that we do live in a zero-sum world governed by limited resources and selfish self-interests? Is this truly all that we are left with at the end of the day of what decides the political and economic policies that will affect the welfare of billions on the planet? After all, it is acknowledged by the theorists themselves that the entire functioning of their mathematical model relies upon the assumption that we are governed by selfishness, and that they feel confident about this assumption since reality has apparently confirmed this fact to them. But what if humanity's nature were shaped by something else entirely? And what if the resources contained in our environment were not as limited as von Neumann supposed? How can we know what is true? How can we know what kind of a person we truly are and not how we have been encouraged to think of ourselves within the framework of a mathematical game? This may be counterintuitive to some, but the hypothesis of a theory must always precede the actual mathematical model. The variables you choose, how you define the variables, and their relationships to one another is not being defined by the model, but rather the creator of said model. Once the mathematical model is created, it can now theoretically add to that beginning structure and mimic a simplified version of reality. However, we should keep in mind that a model that has been created on a false hypothesis could still technically function. Such a model is not self-aware that it is not a representation of reality and cannot indicate so to its creator. Thus, a mathematical model can be a representation of a simplified reality, or it can represent a completely artificial reality. Such an artificial reality nearly destroyed the world economy in 2008, as those computer models relying on statistical probability theory and casino logic of gambling resulted in a systemic breakdown, as demonstrated in the 2016 film The Big Short. At the beginning of von Neumann's book, he goes through several disclaimers which are highly problematic towards the relevance of his theory, one of them being the acknowledgement that there exists at present no satisfactory treatment of the question of rational behavior. There may, for example, exist several ways by which to reach the optimum position. They may depend upon the knowledge and understanding which the individual has, and upon the paths of action open to them, because they imply, as must be evident, quantitative relationships. As becomes rapidly evident, von Neumann makes endless assertions such as these in his book, as if they were obvious and thus need no further examination at all. The assumption that an underdefined, rational, selfish behavior is merely quantifiable and nothing more, and does not account for qualitative change, a mathematician's worst nightmare, is taking great liberty in oversimplifying human behavior to conveniently fit his mathematical model. In other words, it is not an accurate model. You are manipulating the definitions and interactions of your variables to fit an artificial reality. This problem continues today with how mathematical models can represent an artificial reality that in fact has no application in the actual world we live in. In fact, when we look at how a so-called limited resource is being defined, a term that is largely taken for granted today, we immediately are hit with some rather large problematic inconsistencies in even defining what is a limited resource at its most basic level. For instance, what fundamentally determines the limit to a resource? Is a specific resource something that is fixed in its amount, in its availability on Earth that remains unchanged for all time? That is, can a resource only be used up, or can it also be reproduced, regenerated? Obviously, if a resource can be regenerated, then the limit to that specific resource will be determined by the rate it is used versus the rate it is able to be replenished. All resources that are essential to life, including human life, are naturally renewable. There is a natural cycle that causes these resources to be regenerated. This includes the natural cycles of water, oxygen, vegetation, and so forth. Thus, everything that is essential for life is already naturally renewable on Earth. The concern is thus that we are using these resources too quickly with the rate of human population growth, such that these renewable resources will become scarce, causing us to reach a point where the collapse of civilization and rapid depopulation will be inevitable due to extreme scarcity in these essential resources, not to mention the effects this will have on other life forms on Earth. This point of catastrophe is calculated as the point when the human population will exceed its carrying capacity. However, what determines the carrying capacity? Thomas Malthus himself, who was one to create the Malthusian growth model, never actually specified an exact number for when the human population would hit its carrying capacity. This was because it was understood that the carrying capacity is not something fixed, but could be increased or decreased depending on human-made innovations such as agriculture. In 1790, Thomas Malthus did make the prophecy that we would hit our carrying capacity 100 years into the future, meaning, according to Malthus, we should have experienced mass famine and starvation by the year 1890, causing the world to decrease to more than half its size, which, needless to say, was very much off the mark. It should be noted that Malthus was fully convinced that his prophecy was accurate, and that the only way to avoid such a catastrophe was to severely curb the growth of the human population immediately. This included the denial of medical care and food to the needy, since it was thought by the followers of Malthus that the postponement of their death would only use up further resources without any contribution to society.
Make it a habit. A 10-minute AI routine every morning. You'll be unrecognizable. You in?
So this is how the reason this was so off the mark was because such a point in the future concerning the human carrying capacity cannot be determined by a linear extrapolation. This is because, as already mentioned, human innovations change our relationship to the resources we use in a qualitative manner and not just a quantitative manner. Qualitative change has always been the mathematician's worst nightmare in producing models that will supposedly predict trends in the future. How can a mathematical model predict all qualitative change that will happen in the future? Is it even possible? This is something really important to keep in mind. There is no specific agreed-upon optimal number for the human population. Such a number can only be fixed if we were to have absolutely no change in our societies alongside a growing population. But we do have change, and that is everything. Human innovations have so far, and continue, to not only increase the quantity of resources produced, but we have also made qualitative changes such as increasing diversity and efficiency in the biosphere itself. For instance, many of the basic foods we eat today were created through human-made innovations such as corn, apples, watermelons, bananas, peaches, carrots, and eggplants, just to name a few examples of the wide array of foods we consume today that are highly nutritious due to the very reason of human innovation. Without human innovation, our foods would contain a small fraction of the nutrition that they do today, if they had been left as they were found by nature. Even livestock did not exist in the form they do today, if it had not been for human-made innovations. These innovations go back for centuries, well before we knew anything about the genetic domain. The ability to not only grow our own food, but to increase its efficiency in nutrition is a very important ability that has made it possible to sustain ever more people on Earth with a higher quality of life. There is also the concern over limited space. We have a finite amount of space on Earth, this is true, and thus there is only so much space to support a decent standard of living and in harmony with other life forms on Earth. Many think we are fast approaching the dystopic visions that have been heavily pumped into our stream of consciousness, such as these. Isn't this inevitable? After all, there is only so much room, and the poor will only be able to afford the smallest living spaces as land becomes an increasingly scarce resource. Not to mention, how will this affect our capability to grow food if space becomes severely limited? Can any kind of ecosystem or habitat coexist with us at that point? This will be difficult for many to wrap their heads around, since not only are such dystopic predictions everywhere in our entertainment sphere, but also there is a very real problem with how some modern cities are being built today. Let us first deal with the question of how much space we currently have, and then move on to this question of how cities should choose to organize themselves such that the standard of living can actually increase with population growth rather than decrease. Here is an example where we can fit the entire human population all into one-story townhouses back-to-back in just the state of Texas. We wouldn't even need to build two-story townhouses. So we are nowhere near running out of actual space presently, and it won't be until much, much further into the future that such a thing would start to even become a concern. And by then, who knows what kind of capabilities we will have. Suffice to say, it is not a crisis now and won't be for hundreds of years, if ever. Another concern is, will we run out of space for food production? According to the USDA, the world is increasing its rate of food productivity in relation to the rate of human population growth. And according to Our World in Data, the amount of space required to grow our food is decreasing due to increased efficiency. Looking at this USDA graph, we can see that in comparison to the population growth between 1960, 1980, 2000, and today, our rate of food production has been increasing. Thus, not only do we have more than plenty of space to fit the human population on Earth, but we also find that our world food production is increasing in relation to population growth. And the amount of space required to produce this food has decreased. So we are presently nowhere near hitting our carrying capacity. What we are seeing presently is a lack of essential resources such as food and water in localized regions. There is not a shortage of food production occurring. We are and do have the capability of producing enough food for the entire world population. The reason why certain areas are suffering from critical shortages are due to political and economic reasons, which we will discuss in further detail in another episode. In terms of the argument for overcrowding in certain cities of the world, as you can see, India, Eastern Asia, primarily Japan, China, and South Korea, and in Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo are among the most densely populated areas in the world. The common conception is that if you have that sort of population density, you have no choice but to have overcrowding in your cities. However, as we saw with the previous example, if we can fit the world population into Texas with a townhouse each, then the top countries and population size are not really overcrowded. The issue is more so, especially in the areas of Africa and India, a question of living standard.
Stop wasting money on recruiters. If you're a construction company looking for multiple...
It is also a question of how cities with large populations are organized. Tokyo holds one of the largest population sizes of any city in the world at 39.1 million.
Oh, it does matter.
However, if you have ever visited Tokyo, you would quickly appreciate the numerous large, beautiful parks interspersed throughout the city. Cities such as Tokyo, as well as Seoul, Shanghai, and Beijing, are also beginning to incorporate trees along the streets and even on top of buildings in their city centers. Seoul in South Korea holds a population of 26 million people, the largest city in South Korea. Here are some examples of how Seoul has incorporated trees and parks throughout the city. The population of the city Shanghai proper is the third largest in the world, with 26.8 million inhabitants, while the urban area is the most populous in China, with 39.3 million residents. With such a population density, many in the West who are not used to such things think the living standard must be a lot lower. However, what we would see if we actually visited Shanghai is that it is actually quite a nice city. Here is a picture of Century Park, the largest park in Shanghai at 346 acres. China actually takes it very seriously to have a balance between the rapid city growth and the need to include parks and trees so that there is a connection to nature. If you have ever visited China, this is one thing that immediately stands out. Many of these parks are not the average run-of-the-mill either. They are made following the philosophy of feng shui, which includes the idea that a park should invoke deeper reflection and a profound connection to nature. This philosophy is also shared by the Japanese and the Korean people.
Someone brought your attention to that?
Chongqing is the only city in China with a population of over 30 million and can claim to be the largest city proper in the world. Chongqing is the fourth largest Chinese city by urban population, with an urban population of 22 million after Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen. Chongqing Central Park in the city's Yubai district is said to be the largest urban public park in Asia and the third largest in the world after New York's Central Park and London's Hyde Park. Chongqing also has beautiful national parks such as the Wulong National Park. In fact, China is full of beautiful national parks such as the Zhangjiajie National Forest Park, the Huanglong National Park, and the Tianmen Mountain National Park, to name just a few. In comparison, let us look at what the population density for Canada looks like. Needless to say, we are nowhere near running out of space for people, and China has shown that cities can still be beautiful with an increasing living standard alongside a high population density and living in harmony with nature. In addition, we see that countries such as China and India, with among the highest population densities in the world, are also among the greenest regions on Earth. This has largely been due to China and India's decision to implement human-made forests. One of the reasons why this was done was to address pollution problems, since trees are excellent air purifiers. They also happen to be great consumers of carbon dioxide. Large regions of greenery also make for excellent temperature control. In fact, much of these areas were previously desert. This also shows that large ecosystems can thrive in regions with high population densities. Some of the largest human-made forests include the Saihamba Forest in China. This human-made forest is larger than the size of France, atop the once barren Qinghai Tibet Plateau, and covers 270 square miles. Located 280 miles from the Chinese capital, it is called the Green Lung of Beijing.
I think you can say the urban area.
The Malai Forest in India. Popularly known as the Forest Man of India, Jadav Payung is a man who single-handedly planted an entire forest on a barren wasteland. Bothered by the constant animal deaths, the land erosion, and the lack of trees, he decided to take matters into his own hands by planting an entire forest on his own, one that spans over 1,360 hectares today. The Changa Forest in Pakistan. Spanning a massive 12,423 acres, this forest reserve was established in 1866. Yes, it is the oldest human-made forest in the world. Johannesburg. With more than 10 million trees all around, this is the largest human-made urban forest in the world. By invoking better temperature control, we also decrease the occurrence of extreme weather phenomena. Planting green vegetation is an excellent way to keep water inland and not lose it to the oceans or underground. It is also, as already mentioned, excellent at regulating global temperature and thus reducing extreme fluctuations in climate. For example, the Sahara Desert is responsible for a lot of the hurricane activity that hits the eastern coast of the United States. This is due to the rapid temperature change from very hot to very cool air currents that travel over the Sahara, followed by the Atlantic Ocean. The Sahara was once a land of luscious greenery. By returning the Sahara to this previous state, we will dramatically decrease the number and degree of storms hitting the North American East Coast.
Coconut, castaway deodorant. This natty deo is boss. Hey, I'm not having a laugh, lad. Oh, mate.
Planting forests also help to reduce the destructive effects of sandstorms. Sandstorms can cause a lot of damage to city centers, costing up to millions of dollars in repairs, money that could be much better spent elsewhere. Transportation of vital resources is also greatly slowed down by this. And sandstorms can cause serious prolonged periods of air pollution in cities, which cause numerous deaths a year. Palm trees are very good for greening desert regions. They provide shade, they work as a windshield, and can stabilize the soil. They also provide food. In addition, the shade provided can allow for other crops that are less heat resistant to grow more efficaciously. The Serapian forest in Egypt has managed to plant trees in the desert using wastewater. The Serapian forest, which has boomed despite the drought and rainfall deficit, consists of 200 hectares of trees planted in Ismaila city in northeast Egypt and has set a precedent for other African countries. China has also made an immense success in greening its deserts with robust tree planting and have succeeded in changing desert ecosystems to sustain green life over the long term. The Loess Plateau, located southeast of the Gobi Desert, is one of China's biggest success stories in the greening of deserts. Over the course of 9,500 years of unsustainable agriculture, this plateau was slowly turned into a lifeless desert which could no longer support the population. However, within a matter of 1 decade, this area was transformed into abundant green regenerative farming by the use of permaculture. The government launched mass education programs for farmers while providing the resources and incentives needed to transform the land. Additionally, farmers were given ownership of their own land, new planting techniques, and wide-yield terraces were built to secure the soil and improve crop productivity. Vegetation cover and sediment control increased through the protection of arable land areas. Through these bold reforms, soil erosion was decreased by 60 tons per year, resulting in better standards and prices of the crops. Since this project was begun, approximately 2.5 million people have been lifted out of poverty, making the Loess Plateau one of the greatest sustainable farming stories in the world. If this project were continued in other parts of the world, a revolution in freedom of producers, increased bounty of land, transformation of deserts to rich green areas would occur in short order. This project's success demonstrates that an increased well-being to the health of nature, the productivity of a nation, and the freedom of the citizen can all grow together in harmony. In 1872, Henry C. Carey, Lincoln's economic advisor, would write in his book titled Unity of Law, Crusoe, having made a bow, had thus acquired wealth, that wealth exhibiting itself in the power obtained over certain natural properties of wood and muscular fiber, thereby enabling him to secure increased supplies of food with greatly diminished expenditure of labor. Having made a canoe, he found his wealth much increased, his new machine enabling him to obtain still further increase of food and of the raw materials of clothing at still decreased cost of personal effort. Erecting a pole on his canoe, he now commands the services of wind, and with each and every step in this direction finds himself advancing with constantly accelerated rapidity toward becoming master of nature and a being of real wealth and power. Does this sound like the description of a limited resource zero-sum game scenario? In other words, where is the set limit? The limit is constantly being readjusted to what the individual creates, which changes his or her relationship to the utility of the resource. For example, the resource wood, depending on the individual's innovation, can be used to keep one warm and dry, cook food, create torches, create shelter, or create a ship for travel, etc.
2, 1.
The existence of yet-to-be-created potential thus offsets the entire system of von Neumann because his system has no way of predicting potential, in other words, qualitative transformations, nor how this will affect human behavior. If you cannot predict future qualitative change, which is ongoing, such as the discovery of electricity, or the creation of man-made plutonium and other transuranic elements, or the potential waiting to be unlocked by the very feasible fusion plasma torch that can turn landfills into resource mines, this will be discussed in detail in a later episode. How can you assume a defined set limit, or even a defined zero-sum game as a self-evident truth, when you cannot even predict what is the said limit? Ironically, in his book, von Neumann likens his pioneering work in the field of game theory to what physicists have been doing for centuries, that is, mathematical formulations that represent, albeit simplified, the laws of nature concerning matter and energy. However, von Neumann again showcases that he has no comprehension of what constitutes the foundation for such laws of nature. By von Neumann acknowledging that he himself is heavily relying on his so-called self-evident truths in simplifying human behavior, he is asserting an outcome. He is not proving the outcome's natural occurrence. In von Neumann's book, he refers to the greatest good for the greatest possible number as a contradiction, because according to von Neumann, you cannot maximize two or more functions at once. That in a social economy, all maxima are desired at once by various players and thus must come at a loss for the whole. That is, there is no concept that it is possible to cooperate and share an optimal outcome without it coming out of your share, so to speak, that comes at a cost of having less instead of more. This is a very narrow and limiting of economy, and again does not account for how cooperation and creative potential can work to transform the goods of an outcome. For instance, country A is militarily stronger than country B, which is rich in many raw resources. Country A is also stronger politically than country B, in that there are no other countries that will likely intervene against country A's actions if it chooses to invade country B. What course of action will yield the greatest return to country A? Well, there's a very obvious answer to that question. However, contrary to popular thought, it will not yield the greatest optimal outcome. The greatest optimal outcome is rather to cooperate. It is both in country A and country B's best interest to share knowledge, even if country A has much more knowledge, such that country B develops the capability to refine its raw resources. By doing so, country B will yield a greater return in trade over the long term to country A, and country A does not have to worry about a future retaliation from country B. By developing a more advanced economy, the wealth that comes from trade is increased for both countries. By cooperation, the optimal outcome is transformed and offers a greater return than if either country simply looked out for their own interests.
Crypto gave me hope. It gave me freedom. It gave me a way to rebuild my former life. I was very...
John von Neumann goes on to state in his book that the more players in the model, the easier it is to predict the outcome, since the use of statistics and probability are increasingly better indicators of behavior and performance. He states, when the number of participants becomes really great, meaning in number, some hope emerges that the influence of every particular participant will become negligible and that the above difficulties may recede and a more conventional theory become possible. These are, of course, the classical conditions of free competition. He goes on to use the example of our solar system with its 9 major bodies as being much harder to model than 10 to the 25th freely moving gas particles, as per gas theory, simply due to the sheer number of objects you are dealing with. This is truly a remarkably absurd statement where von Neumann is asserting that if the solar system had more major bodies orbiting within it, it would thus be easier to model based off of probability. Every planet in our solar system is different in size and weight, with a different number of moons. Every planet revolves around the sun in imperfect elliptical orbits that change slowly over time. The fact is that our solar system is not some perfectly closed system that is uniform and consistent in its actions. There are cyclical changes, but there are also non-cyclical changes that are occurring. This is due to our solar system orbiting around a galactic center of the Milky Way, which is itself moving in yet-to-be-discovered ways within a larger cluster of galaxies. Therefore, you cannot use any theory of probability because the system is in a state of ongoing, non-linear change. The more bodies you add to such a system, the more complex it becomes, not the more predictable through probability projections. Such an oversimplification of nature shows the audacity behind the assumptions that make up such formulations like game theory, where we are encouraged to think of ourselves as nothing more than a virtual avatar within a synthetic world with programmed limits to what we can and cannot do within such a game. Game theory does not represent the motivations behind human nature, but rather imposes such limitations, since as they acknowledge themselves, it is easier to predict and control your chosen selfish behaviors, which are encouraged and rewarded with incentives. We are taught never to question the rules given to us in these game theory scenarios, but to react to what has been defined to us as a limited set of options in an artificial scenario. Thus, we find that this concept of limited resource and thus zero-sum game is a rather misleading term, since it makes the assumption that growth will occur with no qualitative change. From Malthus to von Neumann and the modern ecology movement, there is a pervasive, uncreative claim that our future can be nothing other than a dismal extrapolation of artificial limitations, despite the evidence of all human history showing a contrary picture. It is time we break ourselves free from the curse of game theory. In our next episode, we will discuss how various forms of energy function and what are the differences in how energy is produced in terms of efficacy, cost, and waste management. This will be discussed in relation to the EU and US policies to reach a carbon net zero by the year 2050.
All right. So that was the curse of game theory. Well done, Cynthia. Well played. Now I hope everybody enjoyed that. And Cynthia Chung has just joined me here in this little studio here in Mexico. And Cynthia, what made you want to do this series in the first place? Nice broad. She loves these broad, open questions. She adores it.
Yeah, you basically get to take a seat back.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the argument, which is a strategy that they use with pretty much all of the major subjects of debate that continuously are brought up throughout centuries. But this idea of whether we can have a positive role as humans, as like real stewards, of creation and earth and so forth. And it doesn't have to be from just a religious context, although I think that that is a really healthy concept, that it's not that we are parasites of the earth, but rather that we have a responsibility towards things. And again, like I find it very interesting, for instance, that like a lot of the food that we eat, even if you're a vegetarian, for instance, like the apple would not be the apple without human innovation. The banana, the watermelon, so forth, all of these like bountiful things that we sort of, I think a lot of people have forgotten, are like the bounties of nature. They're in fact human innovations, or even livestock. There's a lot of human innovation in terms of that. But I think that that's a really beautiful idea, that the fact that, you know, this bounty on earth for just food, for instance, would not exist in its natural form. And I think that that's one of the most elegantly simple examples of how we can actually change something for a better outcome. And it doesn't have to be this monstrous Frankenstein thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just that example, like you said, it's so elegant. And I was so blown away. The first time that I encountered that idea was over corn in nature, because corn exists in nature, and it's called teosinte. It's in Mexico. It grows in the wild, but you can't eat it. It'll break your teeth. There's nothing nutritious. It doesn't matter how long you cook it. It's not edible. But the corn we buy at the store, the corn we grow now, is the consequence, as you just pointed out, of discernment, choice over the course of many generations that generated something which has all these nutrients. It's highly edible and tasty. You can make a ton of stuff out of it, but it's also natural, even though it comes from human thought that wouldn't just emerge naturally in nature. Or like the crab apple, it's super sour, not tons of nutrients in it, very, very difficult and bitter to eat. But the apples that are the consequence of human thought are great. They're luscious, full of sugars and carbohydrates. And again, they're both artificial and natural at the same time. So this whole schism between nature and humans is totally artificial. You
can say that I would anyway put forward that it is lawful that a watermelon is what a watermelon is now. And the fact is that even if we were to leave nature totally untouched, there is, I think, there definitely is a concept of, you know, things just stay static. Or if there is change, you know, it's going to be a lawful change. So like a green, lush area turning into a desert, which is quite barren and supports a lot less life than it originally was, is something that, you know, we shouldn't touch. I think that these sort of concepts actually they're contradictory to what we see as the overall process in nature and in evolution. Matt has done some really good work, basically just theories of Darwin, for instance, and this sort of concept of evolution. But there is this concept in evolution from the better biologists that we never hear of, like
James Dwight Dana.
James Dwight Dana is a big one, who is an American. And they were saying that evolution was towards a self-perfecting process. And I really see a lot of examples that are proving that to be the case. And that was one of the themes in this film, was always a direction towards a future potential. But it's not a random, chaotic thing, which we've been wrongfully taught by a lot of these mathematical schools that ultimately, of course, always impact politics and economics to a great deal. Not a coincidence. And they're always entropic in their view, or you need to kind of like reboot the system by everything just kind of like falling apart and, chaos, and then something comes out of the chaos sort of thing. That's actually more of like a crazy Rosicrucian / satanic viewpoint, that they're trying to trick you into these mathematical models that are actually not a real reflection of reality. So when you actually look at evolutionary processes, which again, Dana is a very good example of that. And if people want to read a presentation transcript I've done on this, they can go on my Substack, Through a Glass Darkly by Cynthia Chung, and just look up Yuval Harari on my Substack, and you'll find the presentation. There's a video or a written format if you want, where I go into this more in detail of how there is a lot of evidence to show that evolution is not random or chaotic. It's not like these huge extinction periods and then something totally new comes out of it that like magic. But rather that there is a process towards increasing complexity and increasing self-perfection. And the fact that there is even like the eye that exists in so many different varieties between species and even, deep underwater creatures shows that there was an intention within an evolutionary process to create something so complex as that. Or like flight, actually the ability for flight was developing all around the world, totally disconnected from regions geographically. Like it wasn't just, animals migrating. It was a process that was occurring all throughout the world around the same period of time. So there was a sort of intention that hit a certain phase shift in the evolutionary process that all of a sudden was developing certain kinds of evolutionary traits. So I think that with us clearly being different from the animal realm in the sense that I know some people don't like that idea, but in the sense that we can actually create to a point where there isn't really a limit, as I hope this film showcased, including discovering, elements, new elements on the periodic table of elements. Like we can play a role where we are facilitating an evolutionary process that is lawful towards the potential that is yet to be, or we can play a very detrimental role and do that sort of like chaos theory, burn the village to save the village, sort of concept, which, you can get. It's true in certain minor micro examples within, how a species is doing and stuff. But that's like, when something is not able to survive or adapt properly, it's not to say that you have never seen something go extinct, but the broader, the more bigger picture of the process is actually something of growth and not just like flatlining and starting completely anew. And so I think that is something natural for us to do, actually.
Yeah, it really helps to break people out of these false binaries as well, because they often, I've noticed that there's this reactionary quality where people will often encounter the ugly anti-scientific, disgusting political aspects of Darwinism that's been created to justify the expansion of empire, but that has certain presumptions that human beings are just another beast to kill or be killed, to spread the powerful over the destruction of the weak, will be submissive in a survival of the fittest type of logic. And people will be disgusted by that, and they'll go to the opposite extreme, saying, well, if Darwin's not true, then the idea of evolution itself can't be true in any fashion, and thus some form of absolute creationism could be the only solution, where everything was just created 6,000 years ago and dinosaur bones are just there to test our faith or something like that. Whereas what you've just introduced is a healthy resolution, I find, from falling into this trap of jumping from one false extreme to another false extreme, and instead recognizing that, no, there are many other approaches to explaining the evidence of changing fossils in the records by many people who lived before and during Darwin's time, but who have been iced out of our history books, like Dana and so many others. But that also applies to the question of the non-living evolution, that the very periodic table of elements itself, of the Mendeleev table, itself is kind of like a quality of evolution of heavier elements generated after, or you've got these lighter elements that have different attributes, that have certain periodicities of how they combine, how they form, how they they react with other elements, where they're found in the different planets around in the solar system, right? What's found near what ores are found near what. And that when you think about it as sort of a quality of evolution, but devoid of the presence of living, the life principle that you find in organic material, you find that human beings, like you just said, can we discover new elements that weren't known prior, like oxygen wasn't known and somebody just found a way to create an experiment. But then also we can create new ones like plutonium. It's not something that we've ever found in nature, but it falls lawfully within the periodic table too. It's not an unlawful, unnatural thing that we've created.
And to prove like how lawful it is, again, Matt has done a lot of good work on Johannes Kepler, who was a very important astronomer who knew that there was a missing planet. And this is before, he had an ability to directly measure and prove what he was saying. And he actually used musical harmony actually to format his discovery, which is another proof that they try not to talk too much about Kepler's proof, because it is so useful in showcasing that there is a true harmony of the universe and how things are being created in terms of even planetary activity. And so he knew that there was a missing planet in his research, which we now think is possibly the Van Halen belt. Sorry.
I mean, Van Halen doesn't walk. But no, it's the series, the asteroid belt series.
It's an asteroid belt series. Why did I say that? Anyway, so there was a missing planet there that he was able to tell from his calculations, and then Mendel.
Oh, because you're thinking of the Van Allen belts.
Van Allen belts,
right.
Which I also still mispronounced. But point being is that Mendeleev also, who is like the Russian chemist who is credited with the discovery of the table of elements, he also was mapping things out to know these are gaps within the element, the table, but I know that lawfully there should be something there, even though we haven't discovered yet what that element is. So again, showing that there's a real lawful process to how these things work.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing, eh? That's true. I forgot about that Mendeleev actually forecasted something like 8 or 9 elements that he didn't even know. Nobody had experienced these elements, but he knew that if his theory were true, and it was, he predicted that there were these different elements that must be there, that would have these attributes. And he correctly described their atomic mass, their attributes, that subsequently over the decades, people thought he was crazy, but they actually slowly discovered each one was actually where he said it would be, which means that there's really something to the theory, that it had that kind of predictive practical power as well. And then the fact that too, the human economy, which is sort of, I think, the other realm, in your film series, you've sort of been dancing around all 3 aspects of existence, right? That everything could be categorized in all matter could be categorized, which also deals with energy, as being organized by the life principle, then the absence of the life principle, and the cognitive principles, the principles that apply with human will, human reason, that organize everything in this room around us. Are atoms organized according to discoveries made by humans that wouldn't necessarily just appear in nature. The apples you were talking about, or the cows or the pigs, or this microphone, which is the accumulation of millions and millions of little discoveries made by people, many of whose names we've forgotten, but it's something purely cognitive. And the human economy is something which is fluid. It's changing. It can get better or it can get worse. When we make discoveries and apply those discoveries, things get better. And we can all of a sudden have more people at a higher quality of life with more freedom, more abundance. But when we stop making discoveries, things get tight. And the Malthusian traps all of a sudden appear to be more true. And that's a powerful thing that you did in this documentary, is I think you weave that together really nicely. That it's true that there are these limits to growth. That's true. But those are the consequence of our lack of creativity and our lack of making the obligatory discoveries that we need to make if we're going to be able to be truly free. We have to always be committed to progress.
And that's the problem with game theory, is that they give you a set of rules, and there's a clear boundary, there's a clear box that you're in a game theory scenario. It's very much like, a video game kind of concept. And you might be able to play around with the rules. There's always like maybe a gray area or whatever, but ultimately you have to abide by the rules of the game master. Whereas real life, the real world, it doesn't work that way. And there is a solution to every problem. And you don't, a lot of times rules are useful, but if you are following a rule too strictly, oftentimes what it does is it limits your ability to imagine alternative scenarios, which is essential for problem solving, is you being able to envision certain things and having a certain flexibility with your imagination. So us being constantly bogged down by dystopic, limited this, limited that, or surveillance state, everything is controlled. What it does, even though that person might even be saying like an Aldous Huxley type, I'm warning you that you're all doomed.
And it's inevitable.
Yeah, I don't like it, but yeah. And that is actually a form of predictive programming that person is doing to you. And there is always a solution to a problem. Not saying that these things are easier, that an individual can change everything, but there is always a solution. And I think if people return to a state of optimism, which we have gone through not that long ago, you realize that the ability to problem solve increases astronomically when you're in an optimistic state, because you can problem solve this. You don't have to eat your grandmother. So there are a lot of beautiful solutions, and we see other parts of the world who clearly have done something that we were told was impossible. Even just these relatively smaller accomplishments in terms of raising standard of living, we were told that these things were impossible, and they've clearly happened. And a lot of people in the West don't even know, right? Like what these cities look like. In Asia, why? Because they want you to continuously think that these people are drinking like dirty, like toilet water and like living in mud huts, because they don't want you to know that there is actually, I know a lot of Americans who got really upset seeing a lot of especially with Red Note, when TikTok was going through its temporary shutdown, a lot of Americans went on to Red Note, which was it was actually a more true Chinese platform, where you actually saw the day-to-day life of a lot of Chinese people, what they were paying for food, for instance, as well, but also what their restaurants look like, what their houses look like. They don't, pay the taxes. When you buy a house, you own your house. Yeah. You're not threatened by an eviction. If you paid off your house, that house is yours for life. So there were a lot of these kinds of examples, and a lot of Americans were getting super pissed off because they're like, what the fuck?
Or just high-speed rail, right? For the equivalent of $3 American, you could go 800 kilometers to another town in half an hour. Or no, maybe not half an hour, maybe 2 hours. But something that would take us 12 hours to do for cheap on high-speed rail, going 400 or 500 kilometers an hour.
Our rail going from Montreal to New York, I think, averages 20 kilometers an hour. It's like a 10-hour train ride to go from Montreal to New York, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. And I think I found that this particular video, I've shown this now to a few people, and I remember we played this for my uncle Pete, and he had to go out in anger smoking aggressively because he just saw all of those images, the direct images of these different Chinese cities and Korean cities that just showcase such a beautiful synergy between high advanced urbanism, while at the same time this beautiful green organization that had this balance, which you could talk to people and try to use logical arguments about why Asia is not this slave state evil that they should be afraid of. You could use words all you want and it won't mean much, but when you see the direct images, the pictures directly of these cities and the urban forests that have been built up, it
and
speaks
just
so loud.
That's a small, pool of examples. There are a lot more examples of these beautiful cities, not just in Japan, South Korea, and China. Like Vietnam has come a long way. Thailand has come a long way. Cambodia is also developing very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's really powerful stuff. And I think also what I really, really appreciated is that little animated graphic, but it speaks very loudly that it appears these two fictitious countries, and it would appear, and I think most people, if they were given the question on a test, like what's the easiest way to accumulate wealth when this country has a lot of resources but is very poor and underdeveloped, and this adjacent country has a lot of military power and not a lot of resources, what would be the easiest way for that more powerful country to gain wealth? I think most people would answer in the naive Hobbesian way that you outlined is the wrong way. They would just go and take it. No one's going to stop them. No one can stop them. But that actually creates negative value in the long run. Maybe in the short run, it creates the illusion of value. But in the long run, like you said, it creates a fear of retaliation. It creates a destruction of potential workforce that could, in a healthier world, be producing more, industrializing more if they gave them the knowledge and the means. That would be better customers, better clientele for them, for their business, and have more people to consume what that more powerful country is producing too, and sell better quality things. Mm-hmm. That's like a competent way of doing anti-game theory business. Mm-hmm. But we're so brainwashed that's like an alien idea for people. It kills me how foreign of a concept that is.
Yeah, like the Roman Empire is an example of a parasitical system of empire. At least, at a certain point, at the birth of the empire, Rome had already become, pretty corrupt. And Matt has done some interesting work to show that, it's not innocent. The birth of the Roman Empire, at the very inception, are the mystery cults around the Sibylline,
oracles.
Yeah. So there is always something, shifty going on with that. And, you have like the Babylonian Empire under certain, rulers, including like the really popular movie 300, where Leonidas fights against the Persian Empire. Like those are parasitical forms of empire where they go into other regions and they just, suck the life out of those areas. And, Rome was first a kingdom, then a republic, then an empire. So people should, be aware of that. And it wasn't always like that, but pretty much once it entered the empire stage, it was like a parasite. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to be that kind of an empire, because you don't have to be that kind of an empire, an empire can just be also representative of a very large civilizational process. And you don't have to be, invading constantly and sucking things out to support, the big machine. But if you're a parasitical empire, that is going to be something that will ultimately, it's an entropic process. You're going to be losing more and more and more. And, there's usually also a lot of corruption in these sorts of things because things are not being utilized for growth and prosperity. That also encourages immorality, right, in the culture, which causes all these types of problems as well. So that the masses often suffer more and more in that kind of system, and the wealth is constantly transferred more and more high up to like ludicrous degrees of crazy debauched parties, right, while people are like starving in the street, kind of thing. So that if you are, as a country A, going to invade country B, it will benefit you in the short run, but in the long run, you're going to self-cannibalize. And if we don't want to self-cannibalize, then we create partnerships that encourage, because the more minds on a problem, the more likely that problem is going to be solved more quickly in terms of the kinds of boundary conditions we do hit in the phase shifts of, like, for instance, just population density. But there is always a solution. If we're putting all of our resources into military escapades, and having an idea of paranoia in terms of just like trying to keep the resources you have and trying to grab other resources, you're not really building in a way that's going to increase wealth. And wealth is not just this quantitative thing, right? Which I hope this film shows. A piece of coal will change in its use depending on the machinery of how you're using the coal. And these examples are limitless with the table of elements. This is a huge gold mine that with like plasma technology, for instance, we can create, like with fusion technology, which China seems to be the only one to have seriously started investing in this. And now we hear it in the States, but of course, if you look at what the States is doing, like the Livermore project, it's completely about military defense, whereas China is looking into how this is going to be implicated as a huge game changer for standard of living. So if fusion energy is brought online, which the best thing is helium-3, which is on the moon, like a speck of helium-3 is more than enough for an entire person's life. So this,
they say 1 truckload of helium-3, if we have fusion power, because it's the most efficient fuel source from the moon, which it's abundant on the far side of the moon, since helium-3 is being generated from the sun, and the moon has no Van Allen belts, there's no magnetic field, so it's constantly for millions of years just accumulating helium-3 on the side that's all, because only one side is unaffected by the Earth's magnetic field, which causes, because the moon's face is always looking at the Earth. That face, because of the protective shield of the Earth's magnetic field, is not really receiving much in the way of the helium-3, whereas the far side of the moon that we never see from Earth is receiving lots of it. And they say that there's something like, estimates are something like 30 trillion tons of helium-3, and 1 truckload is enough to power the Earth at the highest standards of living imaginable today for a full year, 1 truckload. So you can only imagine if you industrialize the moon the way that the Chinese have said, and hopefully the US and the Russians and others follow suit, then all of the ideas of scarcity, natural gas limitations, oil limitations, all of these things go out the window. And we're in a whole new ballgame of abundance.
Yeah, and helium-3 can't land on Earth because of our magnetic field. So it is landing on the moon, but that's not that far away. So this is a massive thing. Or even just the plasma torch has the ability. Right now we have already a plasma torch using nuclear fission, but this is being used because it's so energy intensive, largely by like the military, where you can actually convert landfills back to their elemental forms. So we wouldn't have any garbage. You can use the plasma torch to break these back down to their elemental forms, and you can use them as a resource mine, and you can use it to build something else. And with the plasma torch technology, which if you use it with fusion, it's going to be very cheap. Right now with fission, it's still very energy intensive. You can actually make material that is much stronger than what we can make right now, which means the kind of infrastructure, the kind of things that we can build with it are also going to increase greatly in terms of the quality, but also what is possible for us to do with this, with this kind of material. So these are all like really within reach.
Do you talk about that in your next film on Energy Wars?
I was planning on talking about those things in the last episode 6. Unfortunately, episode 4, 5, and 6 have not been done yet, but we do plan on finishing them. But yeah, those kinds of optimistic projects, I was planning on ending the series with, like, what is very much possible that we're aware of, even just like right now, in terms of how much we've been held back. There's been so much unnatural sabotage, and then we're told that it's a natural processes. Like how many American presidents were murdered? You know why? It was to thwart a natural progress in the American system of economics. Even Jameson Greer was bringing this up in his speech on Hamilton at Davos, that the American system was influencing Friedrich List's Zollverein in Germany, the Meiji Restoration in Japan, the Trans-Siberian Rail with Sergei Witte in Russia, and Sun Yat-sen's rail plans in China. And those are just some of the examples. But this was like really, again, this time in the world where there was a lot of optimism because of what the United States was able to accomplish and exhibit with Henry C. Carey's Centennial Exhibition as well. You know, within 100 years, the US was the leader in innovation. Mm-hmm. That's, again, something that we were told, you know, that should have been impossible. They were like, you know, supposed to be colonial states that were like totally disempowered and would have been subjects of the British Empire. All you can do is farm. Maybe if you get like, you know, an iron mill or whatever, like, okay, good for you, but it's not going to go very far. And within 100 years, they were wealthier than the British Empire, who had its like octopi arms, you know, in India and Africa and everywhere, leeching, being a parasite, and it couldn't compete. So this is a very good example, again, that if you set your course towards like actually having a real intention to solve problems with an optimism and morality, you will actually become wealthier and you will become stronger. And that is the American legacy that's truly great, which we have to just be mindful that there was always a battle with that system and the parasitical system of the British, the free trade and Wall Street. And right now there seems to be a bit of confusion over free trade and Wall Street, which have never played a positive role in the American history. They've always tried to subvert industrial progress in the United States. So just be mindful of that. But again, just an example of how these ideas were spreading around the world. And then it was only undone through a wave of assassinations and the launch of the First World War, which was King Edward VII was the mastermind. He seems to be the creator of MI6, like the origins of MI6 as well. He was a pretty, unfortunately, a successful villain of sorts, you can say, evil genius. But those wave of assassinations had to happen to undo what was a natural process. So it's the assassinations that are unnatural.
Yeah.
It's not us as a human, you know, species.
Yeah, that's such an important lesson, right? That we've been led to become cynical about human nature, which is how we're controlled, because we've been told, like, look at all these terrible things that happened in the 20th century. Look at these world wars, look at the Vietnam War, look at the murder of great leaders. That's the natural, we're told that that's the natural consequence of just humans being human. And that's why we can't govern ourselves. We need some overlords to come in and protect and guide us in the zoo, because the species in the zoo can't govern themselves, right? We need the zookeeper. But no, like you said, it's when you look at it with fresh eyes, all of these things that were terrible were the unnatural imposition on an otherwise beautiful, harmonious, developing species that was combining a metaphysical yearning to be free, to be loving, to be good, to live longer, to have a better life for our kids and grandkids. That's like the natural tendency. And all of this, these assholes who are stirring the pot and lighting fires, they're the unnatural ones that have imposed they've projected their own parasitical characteristic onto us, who have been brainwashed to believe that we are the parasites, but we're not, it's them. Mm-hmm. And I think it's such a healthy, just metaphysical medicine to just have that philosophical foundation to reframe a lot of these arguments about human overpopulation and other things that you don't get in school anymore. Like anybody in institutional schooling doesn't get access to these ideas. And then they're told, okay, if you don't have access to these ideas, you're free to think whatever you want to think and problem solve, but you don't know these things. So there's an illusion of free thought and liberal thinking in schools, of young people going off to try to make the world a better place. And surprise, surprise, they're coming to these preordained conclusions that we need to have some form of abolition of nation states, some form of global population control.
The lesser evil.
The lesser evil has to be justified now to, for the greater good, or that there's no such thing as good. There's just different degrees of evil. So it's really sick and disgusting how they corral people into destroying their own imagination and thinking that they're doing good. But Cynthia, we're reaching near the top of the show here. So I'm just going to quickly scan through just to see if there's any specific questions. I know that SD Gardner here says, where in Mexico are we? So we're doing 2 events. That's actually, if by chance anybody listening is in San Diego or anywhere near the West Coast, up northwest coast of Mexico, we're here. We were invited to speak at a couple of events. One is going to be a little bit more politically edgy this Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Just about 40 minutes below Tijuana, near Baja. That's going to be a politically edgy conference at a big cafe, and then we're going to do something on Sunday featuring a classical music appreciation event with a choral group coming in from Tijuana, a beautiful choral group, some African-American spirituals, some local Mexican folk music. And Cynthia and myself will do some presentations on the deeper implications of what this type of culture that we've been deprived of can do to elevate and edify humanity, and why the oligarchy is insecure and afraid of this becoming cool again. So that's going to be on Sunday. And if anybody is near that zone, contact us through our website. I guess that's the easiest way, is risingtidefoundation.net. There's a little contact us page. You can write a message and we can give you the information about where to come. Both of them are free events.
Go onto your Substack.
Or go on to Cynthia's Substack or my Substack, which I'll put in the description box or in the comment section under this video. That's it, the comment section under this video. I would also say, share this video. I'm going to include the link to the video on Cynthia's Substack. So rewatch, take notes, share. This is great for homeschoolers. I've noticed a lot of people who are doing homeschooling really love your series. Kids really, really resonate to this. It's like a breath of fresh air to get an optimistic scientific idea of what human nature is. Matu says, Matt, if you are being held hostage, blink 4 times. I appreciate that, but this one is voluntary and a joy. But thank you for caring. Appreciate that. Let me just see here. Moker is trying to help out here, saying that I only saw him blink twice. He's only half captured. Very astute. Again, I appreciate everybody having my back. That's cool. Leslie Bear said, we won't quit seeking sovereignty. There is a lot of fun and life and loving to be had. Excellent perspective, y'all. Thank you, Leslie Bear. Also I apologize very much so for the commercials on YouTube. Next time, I'm going to figure out a way around that. There was a solution and I wasn't thinking. So there's that. And also for those who might have noticed there's background sounds, because we occasionally were chatting while the video was playing and they heard that. Sorry to break the mood of the show and the popcorn, but I think the ideas we're still hitting home. I hope. Yeah, that was my fault. Sorry. And just scanning through here quickly before we round it out. Well, there's a lot of comments here. I was totally missing out on a lot of this. Okay, so I think 5 minutes left. There's time for one more added from the third of today's sponsors, which is, I think, a Badlands self-sponsorship ad, and then we'll close it up. So here is a Valentine's Day ad from Badlands.
The following ad is rated M for mature. Soft Disclosure wants you to get naked this Valentine's Day with limited edition his and her bundles that save you 20% off the individual retail prices. Proprietary oil infusions, grass-finished beef tallow, goat's milk from American goats, locally grown herbs and ingredients. Soft Disclosure is putting America First fruits on your skin.
And for these sexy bundles, we've added an all-new boar's haired beard brush and a solid jade gua sha. And the reason I'm here is because Alpha doesn't know how to say these words.
Gusha. His, hers. We need a moment to calm down. Don't hide your skin. Disclose it. Get naked this Valentine's Day with Soft Disclosure. Head over to softdisclosure.com and save 20% off individual retail prices with our his and hers customizable bundles, and use promo code NAKED to save 15% off the rest of the site. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. Promo code does not apply to bundle discounts.
All right, that was a sexy Valentine's Day Badlands ad. So hope you guys have a great weekend. I think Gordon's show is coming up next, so enjoy that. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me today. And do you want to do Energy Wars next week or the week after? Energy War is going to come up next week or the week after. So tune in for that, and we'll have more good conversations. So take care, everybody. Oh, that's not doing it. Here we go.
Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.